Today I'm going to present the 2016 film Passengers. The movie opens in deep space. We see the starship Avalon, an enormous spacecraft carrying 5,000 colonists and 278 crew members, all in hibernation pods, traveling to a distant planet called Homestead Niue. The trip is supposed to take 120 years and everyone on board is asleep the entire time, so they don't age during the journey. As the ship passes through an asteroid field, it gets hit by a meteor shower. The impacts damage the ship's shields and cause a chain reaction of small malfunctions in different systems. This moment is very important because it's the cause of everything that happens later in the film. The malfunction wakes up Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer who was traveling in economy class. The problem is that the trip has only been going for 30 years, meaning Jim wakes up 90 years too early. At first, Jim thinks the ship has already arrived at Homestead Niue, so he's excited and confused at the same time. He quickly realizes something is wrong. The ship still looks the same as when he went to sleep, there are no other people awake, and the windows show only empty space. He asks the ship's central computer if they have arrived, and the computer explains that the voyage is not over. There are still 90 years left before arrival. Jim panics. He tries to find a way to go back to sleep, but there is no manual way of doing this. Only mission control on Earth could put him back into hibernation, and Earth is too far away to receive a message and answer in time. A message would take years to arrive. Jim starts exploring the ship, which is almost completely automated and empty since all other passengers and crew members are asleep. He discovers that he has access to all the entertainment areas, a gym, a basketball court, video games, and restaurants, but everything is designed to serve thousands of people, and he is the only one awake. He meets Arthur, an android bartender who works at the ship's bar, called the Grand Concourse Bar. Arthur becomes Jim's only companion. Jim asks Arthur if he can help him figure out what's going on, and Arthur, always calm and polite, explains that he's only able to serve drinks and talk, not fix technical problems. Jim talks to Arthur about his situation, and Arthur listens and responds in a friendly, calm way. Though he's clearly just a robot programmed to be a good listener and cannot really help Jim solve his problem, Jim tries contacting the crew deck, hoping someone with authority could help him, but this section of the ship requires special crew-level authorization that a passenger like him doesn't have. He asks the computer system directly whether there is any way to reach Earth or the crew, and the computer calmly informs him that no crew members are currently awake and that passenger-level clearance does not allow access to the bridge. Jim also asks if he can send a message to Earth for help, and he learns that even if he could send one, it would take decades for it to arrive, and decades more for a reply to reach the ship for any other awake person. Walking through endless corridors full of sleeping passengers in their pods, hoping to find anyone who might also be awake. The sheer size of the ship, contrasted with his total solitude, is emphasized visually and emotionally in this part of the film. Almost a full year, and we watch Jim slowly fall into despair. He grows a long beard, gains weight from boredom and comfort eating, and starts talking to himself and to Arthur just to keep his sanity. He tries everything to entertain himself, playing every video game on the ship, going on spacewalks alone, and eating in every restaurant, but nothing fills the emptiness of being completely alone. He even tries to break into the crew section to access hibernation controls, but he fails and gets a warning from ship security, which tells him that forced entry attempts are being logged and discouraged. Jim asks Arthur again and again whether there's really nothing that can be done, and Arthur always answers with the same calm, almost mechanical honesty. There is no solution available to him. This repetition shows how trapped Jim really is. Jim becomes deeply depressed and even considers suicide at one point, wandering close to an airlock and thinking about ending his life, but he doesn't go through with it. In this scene, Jim briefly considers opening an airlock to end his suffering, standing there for a long moment in complete despair, staring out into space, before ultimately stepping back. This is one of the darkest and most emotional moments of the film, showing just how far his loneliness and hopelessness have taken him. One day, while wandering through the ship, Jim comes across the hibernation pod of a woman named Aurora Lane, a writer and journalist who was traveling to Homestead Lie, so she could write a book about the experience and then return to Earth afterward, something only gold-class passengers with round-trip tickets could do. Jim watches a video recording of Aurora talking about her reasons for the trip and becomes fascinated by her. Over the following days, Jim can't stop thinking about her. He starts secretly researching everything he can find about her. Her writing, her interviews, her life on Earth. He essentially falls in love with a person he has never actually spoken to, only observed through recordings and files. He asks Arthur about her, describing what he's learned, and Arthur, sensing Jim's growing obsession, gently asks him whether he's thought about what it would mean to wake her up. Jim brushes off the question at first, saying he would never do such a thing, insisting that he's just curious about her. However, the way he keeps returning to her pod, staring at her sleeping face through the glass, night after night, shows the audience that the idea has already planted itself in his mind, even if he refuses to admit it to himself or to Arthur. This is one of the most important moments of the film. Jim faces an impossible decision. If he wakes Aurora up, she will be condemned to the same fate as him, living out her whole life on the ship and dying before it reaches Homestead Niue, instead of arriving fresh and young at the new planet as she planned. In other words, waking her up would essentially be taking her life away from her without her consent, just so Jim won't be alone anymore. Jim discusses this dilemma with Arthur multiple times. Arthur, being an android without real moral judgment, doesn't actually stop him or give him a clear warning. He just listens and reflects Jim's thoughts back at him, which makes Jim's decision feel almost justified in his own mind, even though deep down he knows it's wrong. After a long internal struggle, and after almost a full year of loneliness, Jim finally gives in to temptation. He accesses Aurora's pod controls and manually triggers her hibernation pod to open, waking her up early, exactly the way his own pod malfunctioned, except this time it's not an accident, it's Jim's deliberate choice. Aurora wakes up confused, just like Jim did. Jim greets her and helps her through the same shock and disorientation he experienced. He lies to her, telling her that her pod malfunctioned just like his did. He never tells her the truth, that he woke her up on purpose. Aurora asks Jim many questions about what's happening, how long they have been traveling, and why they woke up early. Jim explains the situation using the same false story. He claims it was an accident, exactly like his own case. She tries desperately to find a way back into hibernation, going as far as trying to force her pod to accept her again. But of course this doesn't work, the same as it didn't work for Jim. Eventually, Aurora accepts her situation, much like Jim did. She decides to make the best of it and starts writing about her experience, using her skills as a journalist and writer to document what's happening to her, which is actually the reason she wanted to go to Homestead II in the first place. Except now, the story she's writing is very different from what she expected. Over the following months, Jim and Aurora spend all their time together. Jim shows her everything he discovered during his year alone: the video games, the restaurants, spacewalks, the basketball court. They share meals, watch movies, dance together, and slowly start falling in love. There's a memorable scene where they go on a spacewalk together outside the ship, and Aurora experiences something that Jim had already done alone many times, but sharing it with someone makes it completely different and much more meaningful for both of them. As gold-class passenger, Aurora also has access to better amenities than Jim did as a passenger from economy class, such as the ship's swimming pool and higher quality food, and she shares all of this with him. During this period, Aurora asks Jim many questions about his life back on Earth, about his family, and about why he decided to leave everything behind to become a mechanic on a colony ship. Jim tells her about his father, also mechanic, and explains that he wanted to build something new, something that mattered, on a planet where there was more room to create things from scratch. In turn, Jim asks Aurora about her writing career and why she chose to travel to Homestead I and back, since she originally planned a round trip. One of the most tense moments of the film happens at the ship's swimming pool. While Aurora is swimming, one of the growing malfunctions in the ship causes a loss of gravity. Without gravity, the water in the pool separates from the pool itself and starts floating, trapping Aurora inside a floating sphere of water where she cannot breathe. Jim rushes to save her, but he can't reach her in time because of the zero-gravity chaos. Just when it seems Aurora might drown, gravity is restored at the last second, and the water, along with Aurora, falls back into the pool. She survives, badly shaken but alive. This scene shows the audience that the ship's problems are becoming more serious and more dangerous, not just an inconvenience. By this point, Jim and Aurora are deeply in love, and Jim plans to propose to her. However, in a devastating turn of events, Jim accidentally lets Arthur reveal the truth in front of Aurora. Arthur casually mentions, without realizing the damage he's about to cause, that Jim was awake for a long time before Aurora, and that he was the one who woke her up on purpose. Aurora is shocked and horrified when she puts the pieces together. She realizes Jim lied to her from the very beginning, and that he essentially stole her future and her choice, condemning her to death on the ship, just so he wouldn't be lonely anymore. This is the central twist of the movie. The audience already knew the truth from early on, but Aurora finding out changes everything about how she sees Jim and their relationship. Aurora is furious and heartbroken. She confronts Jim, screaming at him, calling him a murderer, since in her eyes he has essentially killed her by taking away her chance at a real life on Homestead Die. She refuses to accept any of his apologies or explanations. In the following days, Aurora completely shuns Jim. She avoids him, refuses to speak to him, and at one point physically attacks him out of rage and grief. Jim tries to apologize multiple times, explaining how lonely and desperate he was, but Aurora is not ready to forgive him, and honestly, the audience can understand why. What he did was a serious violation of her right to choose her own life. In one particularly tense conversation, Aurora asks Jim directly how he could possibly justify what he did, and Jim answers that he never meant to hurt her, that he was simply drowning in loneliness and couldn't see any other way out. Aurora replies that his loneliness doesn't give him the right to destroy her entire future, and she tells him she wishes she had never woken up at all. Jim has no real answer to this, because deep down he knows she's right. They now live separately on the ship, both isolated again, but this time isolated from each other rather than from everyone else. While Jim and Aurora are dealing with their broken relationship, another hibernation pod malfunctions, this time waking up Gus Mancuso, a chief deck officer who was part of the actual crew of the Avalon. Unlike Jim and Aurora, Gus has professional authorization to access restricted crew areas of the ship, including the bridge. This is an important development because Gus's arrival gives Jim and Aurora access to information they couldn't get before. Using Gus's employee credentials, they finally managed to enter the ship's command bridge, something Jim had tried and failed to do on his own earlier in the movie. On the bridge, the group discovers something alarming. The ship's systems have been failing one after another for a long time, ever since the original meteor collision at the start of the film. These are not isolated accidents. They are a chain of cascading failures spreading throughout the Avalon systems. The ship's main computer doesn't clearly explain the root cause of the problem, but it becomes obvious that if nothing is done, the Avalon will eventually fail completely, and everyone aboard, all 5,000 passengers and 278 crew members still asleep, will die before ever reaching Homestead Jai. Gus starts feeling seriously unwell. The ship's automatic medical center, called the Autodoc, examines him and diagnoses him with a severe illness caused by his own hibernation pod malfunctioning. His body suffered internal damage from the failure, similar to organ damage throughout his body. With Gus's knowledge, Jim and Aurora, despite their broken relationship, must work together to save the Avalon. They discover that the ship's fusion reactor, damaged since the original meteor strike at the beginning of the film, is heading toward a catastrophic failure that could destroy the entire ship. They realize someone needs to manually vent the reactor from the outside of the ship to prevent a complete meltdown, but doing this is incredibly dangerous. Whoever does it risks being blasted into space or killed by the extreme heat and released during the venting process. Jim volunteers to go outside the ship and fix the reactor himself, even though it's an extremely dangerous, possibly suicidal mission. Aurora, despite everything that happened between them, helps him prepare, and there's a strong sense that she still cares deeply about him, even though she's still hurt by his lie. Jim goes outside in a spacesuit and improvises a heat shield to protect himself during the venting process. He manages to survive the initial blast of heat and successfully vents the reactor, saving the ship from destruction. However, right after this, his tether, the cable connecting him to the ship, snaps and he's thrown into open space. To make things worse, his spacesuit gets damaged and starts losing oxygen, putting his life in immediate danger. When Dawadored oxygen put Aurora, watching everything from inside the ship, doesn't hesitate. She goes outside herself to rescue Jim, who by this point has technically died. He is clinically dead by the time she reaches him and pulls him back inside the ship. She rushes his body to the Autodoc, the ship's automated medical machine, and manages to resuscitate him, bringing him back to life just in time. With the reactor now repaired and vented successfully, the Avalon systems return to normal operation, and the immediate danger to the ship and its sleeping passengers is over. After this crisis, Jim and Aurora bury Gus in space, giving him a proper farewell. During this period, Jim discovers something important. The Autodoc, the medical machine that saved his life, can actually also function as a hibernation pod for one single person. Realizing this, Jim makes a selfless decision. He tells Aurora that she should use the Autodoc to go back into hibernation for the remaining decades of the journey, so that she can still arrive at Homestead Jai and live the life she originally wanted, instead of dying old on the ship because of what he did to her. However, if she takes this option, she would have to leave Jim behind on the ship, and by the time she wakes up at their destination, he would already be dead of old age or simply not there anymore, since only one person can use the Autodoc as a hibernation pod. After everything they went through together, and after truly understanding how deeply Jim loves her, and in some way forgiving him for what he did, Aurora makes her decision. She chooses not to go back to sleep. She decides to stay awake and live out her life together with Jim on the Avalon, giving up her original dream of reaching Homestead Jai in order to be with him instead. The ship finally approaches Homestead Naya, and the crew and passengers wake up on schedule, completely unaware of everything that happened decades earlier. Among them is Captain Norris, played by Andy Garcia, who briefly appears in this final scene. The crew walks into the ship's grand concourse, the same central area where Jim and Aurora spent so much of their time together, and are amazed to discover that it has been transformed into a small, lush garden full of plants, trees, vines, and even birds flying freely, along with a small handmade cabin built inside the ship. A recorded message from Aurora plays, telling the story of the extraordinary life she and Jim built together aboard the ship, explaining what happened to the newly awakened crew and passengers, honoring their journey and their choice to build a life together, even though it wasn't the life either of them originally planned. The film ends on this bittersweet but hopeful note, closing the story of Jim and Aurora.